we're here hanging out, chatting more about the Kingdom Accountability Project.
Or as I call it, the Kingdom Loophole Project.
Kingdom Loophole. There we go. I'm Brantley, and with me is Susan. And we have been having discussions like this for a little while now, where we talk about things in church abuse space and just the spaces that shaped us and formed us into the human beings that we are. Some of it we've kept, some of it we've left behind. And this is a place where everybody can kind of hang out and hopefully feel like they can be part of the conversation. And hopefully we say something that's helpful to people. Yeah.
Yep.
You got any? We're still trying to figure out how to intro this.
You know, I'm still shell-shocked by the Kingdom Accountability Report. And that's
I don't think we knew what we were getting into yesterday whenever we started talking about it. Like, we're used to the, how do I say this kindly? We're used to the half-assed effort of these people. Is that kind? That's not kind.
I mean, it's, I could not have imagined a document that had more contradictions, more loopholes. Like, I expected something with the appearance of, hey, Andrew, how's it going? I expected something with the appearance of credibility, and it does not even meet that metric within, the first page, within the names listed. But my real concern about it is, when I first saw it, I thought, like, oh, it's Paula King. Like, that's a joke, it's Jeremiah Johnson. But then, Brantley, you were looking through the names, and part of the problem is that some of the people who are validating it are like apostles through ICAL in other countries. So we're talking Brazil, Nigeria, and we touched on this a little bit yesterday. But Sheon, he is over 20,000 churches. So that is 20,000 churches who will be looking to this document.
It's not Cheon, that's Papa Che to you, okay?
That's Governor.
Governor Papa Che.
Governor Papa Che. But that's my concern is it's not just a joke document because it is being presented to these churches that we don't have influence in. There are people who really do. They trust their apostle. They trust their leader. And there needs to be sustained public pushback from victims, because if you look at this document, the fourth concern in an investigation is, in their mind, the reputation of the church.
Yes.
And I have issue with that being. I think it's fascinating that is a item of concern. It says the victim is the first level of concern, then the victim's family and the innocent family members of the accused, that kind of thing. But yeah, naming the church and their reputation as an area of concern when you're supposed to be following the call of Jesus, who made himself of no reputation, I think is troubling that they should be considering that at all, because it reaffirms their bias to protect themselves, to protect the institution, to protect the accused. And even the language in it, I don't know, everything about it. The accuser, they call it the accuser. No, call it at the very least the complainant. Because that's what we use, that we use plaintiff.
Or at least just call it Satan. Like, if that's what you're feeling. I mean, if you're
call it what?
Satan, the accuser.
But so I'm jumping in, and we weren't going to jump in right away. We had
it's good. And I think the international implications are huge, because I think that has been one of the biggest pain points that we've not known how to address whenever it comes to the IHOP KC abuses, is the international impact that they've had, and the language barriers that exist. Go ahead.
Tikkun is huge in Brazil, and members of Tikkun Brazil who had been abused on various levels, were reaching out to us to be like, we don't know how to get this information. Like, can I translate what you've written?
Yeah.
And I think that's so, I mean, it's shocking because we're nobody, right? Like,
Mhm.
but that's how global the impact is. And they were like, we still have big posters of Misty and Mike.
God.
Like, that is disturbing.
The handful of stories that we did hear, like, if I remember
Oh,
right, you correct me if I'm
volume.
wrong. Do what?
There we go.
Did something happen?
Yeah, I turned off my volume accidentally. Use your ear.
Oh, could nobody hear you?
No, no, no. It was just I couldn't hear you.
Oh, okay. There we go. I was like, oh, I didn't know I could hear you fine. Um, I remember us hearing that story. I think it was somebody reached out on X or something, and they were talking about like these like forced labor farms that were like doing
Mhm.
like the prayer movement stuff, like in another
Yeah, in
country, which
Brazil.
is just
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
wow.
There is far less recourse because culturally these are much more, a lot of these areas are much more repressed. And so, we can laugh it off here and say, oh, nobody will take this seriously because no one takes Patricia King seriously, or no one takes Jeremiah Johnson seriously. He is taken very seriously in other countries.
Yeah.
Because he is American. And we forget how much credibility the American church has just by name. And then, in addition, like some of the people who contributed to this, Brantley, you found this out, but one of them was a lawyer who is on the board of TPUSA. And that concerns me because now we're talking about people groups outside the NAR being
Mhm.
influenced by the corruption and the cover-ups in the NAR. And their credibility is now being lent. A lot of people, we all have different feelings, but a lot of people view TPUSA as a credible source of commentary and integrity. And to have that
Polluted.
network involved, I'm not going to say TPUSA is involved in this. But a board member
Yeah.
who's a lawyer, that's going to be a measure of respect, um, or credibility, that's going to be lent to this. And he has his own network. He is a pastor
Yeah.
of a major church, right? Correct. And
Yeah.
he was, I believe, Charlie Kirk's pastor. And so you have
One of his many
one
pastors.
of his
So
pastors.
he had
Yeah.
an appearance on News Nation.
Yeah.
So like we went on a deep dive last night after talking about it and stuff, and he had a appearance on News Nation after Charlie's assassination, where he talked about how he was Erica and Charlie's one of their many pastors, is how he said it. Which
I mean,
their sphere of influence is what's concerning.
yeah.
And also in that deep dive, find out that Lance Wallnau like spoke at the TPUSA event last year as one of their main speakers. Is concerning, and the reason it's concerning is because their theology it promotes self-importance for one. It puts them at the center of the universe, but it's domination at the heart of it. Like that is what they want. It's dominion theology. They want to take over all the seven mountains, and this is what they do. They quietly infiltrate. And what was funny about this guy, this board member, is whenever it comes to his connections with NAR and the International Coalition of Apostles or Apostolic Leaders, whatever,
Yeah.
it was very hard to find any kind of footprint online of him being involved, if that makes sense. So, um, we were able to find like photos of him with the John Kelly guy was how we were able
Yeah,
to
who is C.
verify that
Peter
connection.
Wagner's replacement.
Yeah.
And the reason this is so important is like the level of influence these people have. And I'm not saying that everyone who's ever shared a stage with them understands their theology, but
Right.
I am saying that we all know that that lends them credibility and it extends their influence. You might not know who Lance Wallnau is, but if you follow TPUSA, and I have friends very much respected TPUSA. Okay, well, you follow TPUSA, you're introduced now to Lance Wallnau.
Yeah.
And that credibility is shared. That was our whole issue with Francis Chan. You lent Mike Bickle credibility outside charismatic circles. Eric Metaxas, you lent tremendous credibility to Mike Bickle. And
Mhm.
then when push came to shove, you backed him
Yep.
and then said nothing. And you disparage victims and people listened to your voice. And it's that network of completely unaccountable leaders who are
Now trying to establish a false sense of accountability.
yeah, and they are bolstering each other and bolstering each other's reach and bolstering each other's influence, and they're bolstering the influence and reach of abusers with objectively abusive theology, because the theology of Mike Bickle was inherently abusive.
Yeah.
Like, it was all about and inherently grooming. And the same is true of Lance Wallnau. It's all about power. It's all about using God's name to establish dominance, establish influence, establish power. And that is literally taking the Lord's name in vain.
Yeah.
None of it is about serving. None of it is about humility. None of it is about integrity. Lance Wallnau, um, he has protected Morning Star Ministries, and he refused, as he is on their board of elders, he and Cindy Jacobs, who both have affirmed the Kingdom Accountability Project. They have both refused to back. There are 5 current lawsuits for child sexual abuse and negligence against Rick Joyner and Morning Star Ministries.
Which is funny because didn't they call that the Morning Star Accountability Project? Isn't that what they call that?
I can't remember, but it was so
It is.
bad. It's horrifying.
I mean,
And
that's what the survivors called it. So I'm
yes,
saying with the
yes, they
Kingdom
did.
Accountability Project, they're
Yeah.
kind of co-opting that, which is
And
which
what's horrifying about it too is that, you know, Cindy Jacobs was begged to speak out on behalf of victims and call for a third-party investigation, and she did not.
you personally had conversations with her, correct?
I did. I personally had conversations with her, and I told her my story of abuse that was enabled by Paul Cain, and she would not respond to any request. As soon as we brought up Morningstar, she said nothing. As soon as I brought up Morningstar to Les Wallnau, he blocked me. And so these are not people who are interested in accountability. And that is what we wanted to go through today. But I
Yeah, I
don't know if
think
we want to do.
we
We want
skipped.
to do the Great Divide at a break.
Yeah, we'll figure out. So we got that in the back pocket for someday.
I'm
Somebody
so
wrote us a
excited for
prophetic
it, though.
song that we're really excited about. But but we titled today the Kingdom Accountability Project Violates Victim Rights. And part of what we were talking about today offline was that yesterday we started going through kind of like line by line and talking about problematic stuff and bouncing around. But Susan pointed out that it's real easy to get lost in the weeds doing that, and that there's some big overarching ideas that are very problematic that are kind of almost hidden in here,
Yeah.
that cause problems, that cause issues. That we see a lot of performative language that says victims are number one priority. The victims are point of
Mhm.
first concern.
Do we want to read that? The statement of victim rights?
Yeah. I think that's what we do. We go through it. I
Yeah,
updated I don't know if you looked at our notes. There was a couple of things I crossed out and updated that was
perfect.
not 100% accurate, but I think it would be nice to go through this. Let me pull up the screen share and see if I can get it to work right. The same from yesterday on the document so everybody can see what we're looking at.
I interrupted Brantley while he was saying it, but the goal is to actually show how, looking at the victim rights, we affirm those rights. And I think I would probably expand on some of them or be more specific. But the rights that are laid out sound so good. And what we want to do is go through and show you how this document actually violates the very rights that it says victims should have, in pretty profound ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll just read this header here. In recognition of the sacred dignity of every person. Again, I want you to keep in mind that we're talking about this, keeping an eye on performative language where it seems like people are saying the right things, but the actions that they take after these words they speak can be very different. And that's what I'm always concerned about with these people is not what they say, but what they do.
Yeah.
In recognition of the sacred dignity of every person and the grave responsibility of spiritual leaders, we affirm these fundamental rights of those who have been harmed by clergy abuse of any kind. These rights are grounded in biblical justice, ethical accountability, a commitment to truth, healing, and restoration. And then what we get after this is, I think, 10 of what I guess a victim's bill of rights kind of thing is what they're kind of what
Yeah.
they're about.
Yeah.
And
And
the
I
first,
actually wonder if they pulled those from the PRT. I'm actually really curious. I didn't think to look. Um, Sorry, I didn't mean to
No,
interrupt you
you're
there.
good. And so the first one is the right to be heard without retaliation. I'm pulling up our notes here on that. It's a section, yes. So what ends up happening, let's read it. The right to be heard without retaliation. Victims have the right to speak the truth about their experience without fear of retribution, character assassination, or dismissal. Retaliation in any form, spiritual, social, legal, is unacceptable, which is nice in theory.
And yeah, and there's two things I want to look at there. So one is they've tacked on the right to be heard with retaliation, which I affirm that, but they actually have the right to be heard objectively and
Yes.
have their claims evaluated objectively. And one of the very first ways that that is, so right here, they have the right to speak the truth about their experience without fear of retribution, character assassination, or dismissal. So dismissal is a form of is they're saying is a form of retaliation, which you could call it that. But yeah, right off they right off the bat, you know, they have they don't want victims to speak on social media,
Yeah.
and so
The
they're already
It goes back to the
limiting.
credibility litmus test that we talked about yesterday. Is
Yep, and that's the other one is there is a credibility litmus test, and so they literally say that before an investigation takes place, any allegation that's brought, and I think we have that section. Um, Here we go.
4. Let me pull.
Section 7.2.6 demands victims with a quote conflict of interest face initial skepticism and heightened scrutiny. And here's my issue with that. Leaders have a conflict of interest inherently
Someone
by having a by having a position, and so does the entire body that they have convened. And we'll get to the body of presbyters. They're in their view, things should be viewed, weighed by a body of independent body of council of presbyters. But it's funny because they also say, but the board of directors could also do it. But anyway, but yeah.
Yeah,
And then the things you have here, someone known to harbor bitterness. Okay, that's not quantitative.
that's not a clear conflict of interest. Someone who is
But
bitter.
but I am bitter about my abuse. A
So
lot of times,
ultimately here,
victims are retaliated against by being removed for their position already. So there's already a conflict in how we're using terms like, okay, so you've been motion. Okay, well, what if, part of this is I, as a victim, have stood up to my abuser and said, hey, no, I don't want to, I think this is wrong. Like, stop touching, whatever. And then I'm fired.
yes, yeah,
So now am I going to be met? So then if you go down to section 7.2.6, it says that their allegations should be viewed with initial skepticism and heightened scrutiny. Well, I mean, that goes right down, to now we're already in conflict with the third victim right to be believed and taken seriously.
yeah.
Victims have the right to be met with empathy and not suspicion. Their testimony should be received with compassion, humility, and an earnest pursuit of truth. Oh, except for if we've decided we think you're better before we investigate.
And it has to be the other big part is that it has to be on their terms.
Mhm.
They define the ball game. For victims, they tell them the process that has to be followed, and
Right.
they tell them what behavior is inappropriate. And the reality is when people are harmed in Christian environments, it causes a crisis of faith. And many times these people who were harmed may no longer identify as Christian because of the abuse that they've endured.
Yeah.
And to ask them to submit to biblical processes at times is very insensitive of the harm that they have endured, because that is the place where they have encountered harm. For me, that's the place that I've encountered the most harm in my life, is in the four walls of the church. And so to think that a quote unquote, and I'm not debating the veracity of it, but to think to take a traumatized victim and put them in a quote unquote biblical process, when quote unquote biblical adjacent things have caused them tremendous harm just seems a little tone deaf. But then once you pull in the social media component, and the constant thing that we see in this document is do not talk about it on social media, do not talk about it on social media, which in a sense is saying do not tell your story publicly. And that goes against their right to be heard. I think if someone with significant power causes you harm and they have significant power within an institution, being able to speak freely and publicly is a reclamation of that power.
Yeah.
It is a story that they cannot control, and that's what ends up happening when these institutions get a hold of a story, is they will sanitize it and strip it down to where it seems like we saw with Robert Morris, is that he had a indiscretion and committed adultery years ago, when really he essayed a minor is what happened.
Well,
Um,
and part of this is, you can jump just on that point to about, you know, 3 or 4 of the victim rights that are being violated, because under 6.11.4, it says victims have the right to control how and when their story is shared. So, if a victim has a
but
right to
but
control
not
how and when their story is shared, and they are asking other people, "Hey, I want you to share about my story on social media. I want you to share my side on social media." Someone comes to me, "Hey, I have had victims come to me and say, I have published this story. Will you?" I don't ever like bring forward, you know, allegations that are the first time something's been addressed. I don't have that. Whatever. That's a personal way I handle it. But I I will help them in any way I can find someone who is qualified to pursue that for them. And if it's public, I will absolutely advocate for their right to be heard.
yeah,
And if they come to me and say, "Hey, here's my story. Here's the news story on it." You better believe I'm absolutely going to share that news story. I'm actually going to absolutely going to share that blog post, and I'm absolutely going to ask the church, "What are you doing to pursue justice? What investigation is taking place?" So to say that that is not being judge and jury.
yeah.
That is that is bearing witness and asking for the right form of investigation, which this document does not do.
And two, it my brain farted.
Well, all right. So we've got right to be heard without retaliation, right?
Mhm.
Um, the next one is right to safety and protection. Victims have the
What
right
were
to
you
be
just talking
protected.
about? What were you just saying?
I was saying, they're talking about, litigating it on social media, and
That's
I'm
what
saying
okay.
discussion of it on social media is bearing witness. It is victims controlling their story, and
You were talking about first time abuse disclosures too,
oh,
like,
first time abuse, yeah.
it and one of the things that we see delineated in this document is criminal behaviors versus non-criminal offenses, I guess. And
Mhm.
and one of the reasons why, like, it's not smart sometimes to do first time abuse disclosures like publicly on your own. Like, we would, if somebody comes to us and with an abuse story and says something, like, almost every time we're like, hey, like, get a lawyer, like, find
Yes.
someone to talk to, do
Yeah,
something like that,
yeah.
because they're going to be able to give you advice, especially if it's something of criminal in nature, if it's some kind of essay,
You
something.
can undermine your own case by sharing it online. There are cases where actual victims, have been sued for defamation based on sharing their story, and it doesn't always succeed, but it can cost you, and you have to be able to prove things that are sometimes unprovable.
Yeah, and it can be financially devastating, and that's why with these kind of things you approach it with so much scrutiny, because I'm sure we could present many case studies where these
Yep,
things have happened
yep.
repeatedly. Do you want me to read the next one, number 2?
Yeah, let's
I
go.
think
Let's go.
in our notes here, it's number 2 in our notes as well.
Yeah,
The right to
we're
safety,
on page 40 for anyone who wants to just, like, follow along.
the right, which I think that we also heard yesterday, that there are names on this document that did not consent to having their names on this document.
Yeah, more than one. I've heard of at least 3.
So there's probably going to be a couple versions of this document that go around. But the right to safety and protection. Victims have the right to be protected from further harm Churches and ministries must take immediate and meaningful steps to ensure their safety, including separating alleged abusers from positions of influence during investigations.
So I think this is interesting because it says separating alleged abusers from positions of influence during investigation. It does not say, um, you know, that they need to step down. It does not say they need to, um, that say for Mike Bickles as an example. Separating him from a position of influence meant them saying he's no longer a leader, but they didn't, um, you know, ask him to not appear in the prayer room. Now he didn't, but if you're in a church,
They eventually did.
they eventually did.
Yeah, it was like a month in or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. And so I think it says here, churches and ministries must take immediate, meaningful steps to ensure their safety. But then it says,
That's what I was pulling up was the 9.1.3 because
yeah,
it acts like that they should be removed from ministry is kind of what they're removed from their positions of influence.
yeah.
And whenever we look at their suggested disciplinary actions, we see that there are three choices here that they keep continuing in ministry, temporarily removed for a time, permanent removal.
And it talks about, and this is where I'm talking about, they don't consider emotional safety of not just that victim, but prior victims. So let's say they're wrongfully accused. Okay. Um, so let's go worst case scenario. This is a false accusation. There really is some bitter person. That is,
Very small percentage of cases.
yeah, it's like 0.02% of cases or 0.08 or something like that. I mean, so let's say that there is a false accusation and they label it an indiscretion. And if you scroll to their definition of indiscretion, it is incredibly vague. And they get to determine so unwise, unwarranted actions, behaviors, and misconducts that show a lack of good judgment. Now, often involving moral, ethical, or social impropriety, not connected to a prolonged pattern of such behavior, but reflecting momentary and isolated lapses in good judgment. Okay, so let's say a pastor puts his hand on my thigh. And I feel that was sexual harassment based on the comment he made with it, which was maybe something like, wow, your legs look really great. No one else has reported at this
A
point.
beautiful child of God.
Yeah, you're such a beautiful child of God. As a father, what if as a father figure, he slaps my ass? Let's use a real life example. What if he Mike's Browns?
Hypothetical.
Hypothetically, what if he does something that I could name the Michael Brown? All right, the Dr. Michael Brown. Any relation to real figures? Purely coincidental. All right, that was labeled an indiscretion. That was labeled an indiscretion.
Yeah.
Because they believed his his
They see he was
evaluation.
more credible.
Yeah, but he was like, I didn't intend it that way, and they believed that, and so they determined that was an indiscretion. He was not removed during the entire investigation.
And intent does not determine impact.
Exactly. And intent, also, people lie about their intentions. I have never known of a rapist who was like, I had absolutely intended to rape her. When has that happened in the history of rape?
Hypothetically, if we're talking about could be scenarios, someone might say that they asked.
They might say they asked for consent. Hypothetically, they might say she came onto me. Right? So
And we see this. This isn't just like playing devil's advocate of like.
No, this is what always happens.
News stories.
99.99% of the time. And so that's what's really hard is saying, okay, when we say, this whole thing about the rights, safety and protection, not only is that not safe for anyone, It's not safe for victims, but it's not safe for anyone in the congregation.
Yeah.
That let's say, yeah, it is just
And that's why power is so central to all of this, is because like the power center belongs with the ministry, the church, like that leadership team, and in this case the formers of the document, and they get to determine what these definitions mean and and there's a lot of choice phrasing in there, like biblical process. Like there's not room for broad interpretation. In one point, I remember as I was looking through earlier, they used the phrase misapplication of scripture. And I'm like, okay, but whose interpretation are we going to use?
well, and are you misapplying some of scripture in here?
Right, right, right. And so like whenever that power of definition falls onto the people who have maybe not directly contributed to the harm, but have vested interest there, conflicts of interest, speaking of. And I think that's why it's important to have those third party organizations to be able to step into those situations and professionals to be able to step into those situations, right?
Yeah, which brings up, I
Mhm.
believe, the next, 2. Well, so I wanna also say in terms of the right to safety and protection, part of protecting victims from further harm is having qualified investigations. So you want an actual, qualified individuals evaluating this, and there are no qualifications listed for this, um, alleged independent body of presbyters and, committee,
Except that
sorry.
they're ministers. Like that was like the one.
They are ministers who are viewed as mature, but that is not if you look at the one document that we have that was developed, with an eye towards biblical process by experts, we have the PRT. That is the Pastoral Recommendation Team for the IHOP KC investigation. And they outline what they think should be the I'm scrolling to it, pardon me.
Which we talked about yesterday. Like
Yeah,
you would go back and look at that. It talks about all the different professionals. So it talks about like mental health professionals, like abuse experts.
yeah.
I'm trying to remember it had like a handful of different specific roles that were designed to bring impartiality, expertise, and safety, right?
And so here you have each local congregation or ministry should select this group by whatever method they deem appropriate.
Yes.
So already we are again violating the victim's rights. We're violating multiple victims' rights with that one. We're violating the right to safety, prevention of further harm. We are inviting. There's no emotional safety in not removing the accused
Mhm.
for both them and other people. And they do say like, oh, sometimes they should be removed, but there isn't any criteria given. They're like, if
And
that's the
reinstatement
issue,
is always an option,
yeah.
according to this document. After 2 years, reinstatement is always an option regardless of the crime, depending on what the ICP says.
And I want to emphasize this when we talk about safety, um, and the victims have a right for their abusers to be held accountable. You scroll down to this section at the bottom, section 9 point.
This
It's like
document is
it's
huge.
like 9.2.
The
Oh
continuing
my
ministry section of this
heavens.
one.
There's so many sections. Yeah, so it talks about it's further down, it's like
For
9.4 or something
spiritual abuse,
for
for
sexual abuse.
heresy, embezzlement, grooming, pornography,
Criminal actions, that's the one.
harassment. Was there one criminal? Did I pass
Yeah.
it?
Nope, it's at the bottom.
Uh, criminal behavior.
Okay. So I wanna point this out. So it says here, there are 10 crimes listed under 3.11, which they're actually listed under 3.17. That are there are a lot of errors in this document that are representative of any number of criminal behaviors that violate federal, state, and local law. Since laws differ from place to place, leaders overseeing a case like this must be given broad latitude to determine the severity of the crimes and the appropriate disciplinary actions associated with it. So, that said, if a person has been accused and found guilty, and keep in mind broad latitude to determine severity, if they've been accused and found guilty of criminal behavior using biblical jurisprudence,
Defined by Dan Juster.
which is very interesting. So it's not if they are found guilty in a court of law. So even if you are found guilty in a court of law, if you are not found guilty using biblical jurisprudence described in 6.0 of this document, okay, if you are found guilty, according to Dan Juster, assuming you are willing to go through corrective actions, here's what happens. And then if you go through those actions, you can request reinstatement. So even if you are found guilty, not by the law, but by them, so you're found guilty by the law, not found guilty by them, it's not criminal. You are found guilty by every metric, let's say. Okay. You may request after 2 years and be considered, even if you are removed permanently from ministry, and it says that further in, you can request that, I'm going to say it, independent committee of presbyters.
Let's bullet 3 here. It says that because it says they should do the following: report themselves, submit to the due process, the biblical due process of 6.3, and then be considered permanently disqualified for any ministry office as described in 6.6 of this document. But then you go down to the last bullet point here, and it says reinstatement may be requested after 2 years and considered by the leaders handling the case.
So now I want us to go to section 3.1.7. And I want us to look at the kind of criminal behaviors they are saying that they are giving these leaders broad latitude to determine whether or not it's severe enough to not be reinstated after 2 years. Sexual abuse of minors, engaging in sexual acts as an adult with individuals under the legal age of consent as determined by state law. In some states, the age of consent is 14. Okay?
They're trying to lower it in DC right now.
They could quite literally possession or distribution of child pornography, grooming or luring minors for sexual purposes. After 2 years, they can determine, well, was it really that bad? Was your use of child porn really that bad?
Okay. What's your definition? How are they qualified to say that they are healthy again? Like if that is some kind of defect,
there are 4 pages. 4 pages.
It's 3.
Oh, there's 3
I had to
pages.
correct that in your notes.
It spans 4 pages.
It does.
But it is 3 pages on what forgiveness looks like and the importance of victims forgiving their abusers, and half that amount on what actual repentance and reparations look like. Half that amount. That is obscene.
And that's the part that needs to be talked about the most, is the reparations part. I don't even care what the ministers do, but I'm saying, like, how do you pick up the wounded and heal them? Because you don't.
Exactly. These are lifelong repercussions.
Yeah.
I was abused multiple times, and it impacted. It took within my marriage a good 15 years to get over, and I'm not over it still. I just mean to get to a baseline where it was like, this isn't impacting me nonstop and my ability to trust.
Yeah.
Like, you have no idea how long. People are never the same. They are never the same. So, but after 2 years, if you, let's see, scroll down a little further, because my favorite.
Failure to report financial crimes is a fun.
Now keep going. Human trafficking and exploitation.
Oh, fun.
After 2 years, you traffic someone. You take a minor across state lines. You sell a minor. Clergy involved in sex trafficking rings or exploitation under the guise of religious work or missions, they can be sorry and repent.
What's hilarious is that they are admitting that happens.
Yeah. And they're admitting that they do not care. That is not accountability. You do that and you are in jail. So if they decide, due to biblical jurisprudence, that you are guilty of that, which, whether the law says you're guilty or not, so the law, might not be able to convict you, or the law does convict you, but like you get like a really light sentence, right? Like whatever reason you get off. Or let's say the president of the United States clears you. Let's say you are exonerated and you are released. Well,
Buddy
you
in
can
the
go
face.
back into ministry as long as you ask them and they think you're repentant enough. They get to decide. They are given broad latitude. That is not protection. That is not prioritization of the victims of those crimes. But not only is it not prioritization of those victims, it is not prioritization of any victim. Any victim. I would not feel safe
Yeah.
with
Did,
anyone who reinstated those people.
did you catch this one here?
Oh my God. Use of drugs to incapacitate victims. Holy Mike Bickle, Batman. I mean, but it's fine. You drug your victim and then you rape them.
I know we talked about immigration and
Okay,
identity fraud, but we didn't.
need to
I
leave
didn't read the bullet points below it. Falsifying documents or identities for illegal entry or protection of abusive clergy. Is that a shout out to Robert Morris taking his yacht? Is that what that is? I don't know.
Marrying immigrants fraudulently under religious pretenses. I don't know if we're describing trafficking or if we're describing getting someone a green card. But I don't understand why that's in here. Why in a document
I'm
about
glad they didn't say
quoting?
protecting immigrants. I'm
I,
glad they didn't say that.
yeah, I mean, I have some issues with us throwing immigration in there at random. And again, this feels so offensive because this is supposed to be a document, and I want to name this. The wording in this is that it's accountability for the sake of victims, and victims are the priority. But if you read the actual document, it doesn't say leaders. So there is a section on fornication. There's a section on
Adultery.
adultery.
All those
It is never fornication or adultery if you are a clergy member. It is always abuse. It is always abuse.
Notice that there is no definition of clergy sexual abuse, is there? They do talk
They,
about power differential.
they
But
have, okay, so they have clergy sexual abuse named as one of the options. But what is interesting to me is they leave themselves the option to not define it as clergy sexual abuse, even if you are a clergy member, which makes me ask two questions. One, are they trying to have leeway so that they don't have to call it clergy abuse and they can call it adultery? Which is the same thing with indiscretions. That's why that category exists.
yeah,
Because they don't want to call it clergy misconduct. They want to call it an indiscretion. Well, no. What Dr. Michael Brown allegedly did, and I'm saying that because I'm legally required to say allegedly, what he seems to have done by the very credible allegations that are being brought is he seems to have abused his position to inappropriately touch and commit like clergy sexual misconduct. And
that happens through very intentional grooming over time.
It does. And they reserve the right to name that as an indiscretion rather than grooming. And again, this is not being evaluated by people who are any like they get to decide if the touch was sexual or not, and they really don't have that right. But anyway, going down the list because we've bounced all over.
Yeah, we have. Let me go back. What was it?
It's so hard not to do because they violate it in so many ways.
611 is the victim rights. We're going to be so familiar with this document.
I'll tell you what.
Section 3's definitions. I'm starting to figure it out.
Tap me in, Patricia King. Let's chat.
She did give an open invite. If you want me to appear on your podcast, let's go. Let's talk about it. That would be hilarious. The right to be believed and taken seriously. We haven't read that one, have we? Victims have the right to be met with empathy, not suspicion. So all your credibility tests, like
that's violated immediately.
And that's what's the credibility of people, and it like shouldn't be. I could see credibility of allegations, like if if like when this supposedly happened, this pastor was out of the country for a month and it supposedly happened on this date and they got firm proof that this person's saying it happened on this date and it's not a credible allegation, like that's a different thing. But
But
just if somebody's
that
lying,
is what an investigation is for. An
yes,
investigation establishes the veracity of the allegation.
yeah,
And that is what it is. So we when we look at the Mike Bickle investigation, the wording is he more likely than not.
yes.
He admitted to this portion of it. The pattern, there is a preponderance of evidence of this pattern.
And he said he did not do the more serious stuff, is what he
Right. And then they were like, however, these are credible allegations. And so what's really hard is that, they not o yeah, there's
yeah.
I would have to touch on 100 things, but it's like there's no there are no real protections for victims here. It is broad latitude on
Yeah.
every part of this. I would describe this as the Kingdom Broad Latitude Project.
And the fourth one's the right to confidentiality and privacy. And we've already touched how this is conflicting information
Yeah.
across
So,
different points.
sure, confidentiality, and privacy, but they are really what they're really doing with this is they're protecting the minister's right to confidentiality and the church's right to confidentiality, because they are determining.
And it does say victims have the right to control how and when your story is shared,
Yeah,
but then you look at the rest of this document and
that's not true. Yeah. So then the right to a fair and impartial investigation. Victims have the right to an investigation conducted by a qualified, neutral, and independent body. So it
that's a
is
big
it's
term we need to define right there.
so qualified. There are no qualifications listed.
Except they're a minister of good reputation. Like
And
that's
who is determining reputation? If you look in the PRT,
and how
it
many
says you have
ministers
to have
do
a good
any
reputation among victims. So, but there is no such qualification here. A neutral, okay, well, it's established by the board of directors, and they get to establish it however they want. So that's not neutral
yeah,
or independent.
yeah.
Um, and the victim has no say. Those overseeing the process must have no conflicts of interest, but they don't determine what conflicts of interest are and must uphold biblical justice.
They can't be bitter. The investigators can't be bitter.
They can't be bitter or recently fired, and due process. So there is no due process here actually for the victims. That is part of the problem. There is plenty of process for the ministry, and there is plenty of process for the minister.
Yeah.
There is not due process, and they don't understand what that means. That is a legal term. They are not a qualified legal body.
Have you looked to see if there is any provisions? There may be. We've still not got the whole document processed, but any
We've read it all the way. I read it all the way through, but there's a lot. There's so much.
is there any provisions for if a victim does not follow the due process thing? Is like are the accusations still heard? Do you know?
You know, I don't know.
Or we're gonna have to look that up later and
Yeah,
see.
that's interesting. I didn't like see anything overtly about that, but there's a lot of things that are by implication, and
Yeah.
it's really hard. You have to read like several times through.
Well,
So
that's why you need like a, this is almost like a legal document in a sense, and it needs to be treated with such respect and care. Like there shouldn't be contradictory statements. There shouldn't be misnumbering of points. There shouldn't,
yeah,
Yeah.
and I'll skip down to 611.7, the right to trauma-informed care. This entire document is not trauma-informed. And this process is
Why do you
weird,
say that?
because there were no professionals who understand trauma involved in the creation of this document, because it subjects a victim to a process in which they have not been given a voice in implementing, and subjects them to the judgment of a body that they have not been given a voice in selecting. or even like feedback. So like if we were doing due process in a court of law, and I don't even find a court of law particularly trauma informed, but it is just, they would have the right to a jury of their peers.
Yeah.
So the judiciary, the concept of a judiciary body being made up of not only people who are not trauma informed, not educated, they're not qualified or trained in conducting forensic investigations, they're not trained in recognizing abuse. I mean, that right there is profound. It's so we're already setting them up to be re-traumatized because the very people who are conducting this are ministers, and they were abused by a minister.
Yes.
They're being judged by ministers. There is no qualification in here that anyone conducting any of these interviews be a woman. So as a woman, I would have to disclose my abuse to a minister who I have no say. I may have no trust for this person. And they are someone who is in the very position that abused me. And they have absolutely no experience with actually handling these with integrity, with actually evaluating. There's further down. Another reason this is not trauma informed at all is it talks about looking for consistency in the victim's story. But anyone trauma informed would know that because of the nature of trauma and because of the nature of abuse, victims are not consistent with their story in the sense that they will often, like, the details will come out in spurts. There will be more and less detail. Sometimes they will say, like, there are small inconsistencies, but the larger framework for the story is usually consistent. But it's because of the way that trauma actually fractures your ability to recall memory. You actually literally, it is protective to your brain, to your body, to your nervous system, to not be able to recall everything at once in perfect detail, because it is actually re-traumatizing every single time you re-access those memories.
Yeah.
And so this entire process is asking them to submit to people who mirror their abuser. They have no voice. They have no advocate. There is no advocate for the victim in this process. There is no method for them to say, hey, I disagree with this. Because if you look, the decision of the body is final. So no part of this is trauma informed, no part of it is due process, and no part of it is even just.
Yeah. The ministers thing is the big hang up for me. And it's like, if I'm thinking about ways to improve this and like points to talk about with those people, if they're interested, is that that idea, like the jury of peers idea. I don't know how that plays out if it's but I think lay people have more objectivity to something like this. If it's not their pastor, that's probably the key thing there. If it's not their leader that's being accused.
And in actual due process, you have experts conducting an investigation, and then speaking and explaining that area of expertise. So like in an actual trial, you'd have like a lawyer conducting an interview, but the police would have actually, taken a statement, if we're talking about criminal, and then you would have like an expert on sexual abuse actually speak to the nature of that evidence and actually evaluate it and interpret it for everyone else. And you'd probably have two experts, like both sides would get an experts. And so this displays, Dan Juster, I'm going to say this outright, Dan Juster displays an alarming lack of understanding and education on what due process, what qualified investigation, forensic investigation, because that's what you actually need to have, a forensic investigator evaluate a trauma-informed forensic investigator. Like, we are talking about, say child sexual abuse happens. They want to be able to determine, so this child would have to go to the police. The police would handle it. But if you want this guy removed from ministry, right? Say he serves his 6 months. Child sexual abusers don't get put away for a long time. So he serves 2 years. He wants to be back in ministry. Does the child need to give testimony to these people who have absolutely no business interviewing a child? They have, I have a friend who was a child forensic interviewer. She worked with the police. That was her job. She was a detective. She was trained in and she could only work this job for a couple years because it was so profoundly traumatizing.
No.
She was highly trained. No one else was allowed to conduct those interviews. She had to be called in. So they have absolutely no business doing any of this. And they have self-appointed by the authority invested in them that I have declared myself
God has given
qualified.
them the authority. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to them. That's why they're on a power trip.
Yeah, they are. They're on a power trip. So, I mean, so the right to accountability for offenders?
And we got
No.
5 minutes, so let's hammer through these.
Well, yeah. Well, that's violated, and I think we've said 1,000 times how. Held fully accountable. Accountable to what standard? Accountable to the standard we've set out here, which is they can come back at any time. Which, again, violates
When their
everything.
buds in the ICP say they can.
The right to reparative action. Let's actually read the reparative action because I don't. Reparations.
I'll read this point while you're looking. Victims have the right to reparations where harm has occurred. This may include, but is not limited to, actions like personal apologies, public acknowledgement of wrongdoings, financial reimbursements, positional restoration, institutional apologies, etc., that satisfy the victim's right to truth and justice. Do you find anything else in the doc?
I can't even find the word reparations apart from once. And so I'm trying to figure out, I know I saw something about, financial compensation. And that should be done by people who have experience with that. And then they don't list what that actually means. But I'm struggling to find okay, so I guess it would be like suggested disciplinary actions under, I'm assuming it would be under that.
I'm not sure.
Provide remedies for any damages caused by their actions, including payment for counseling, an amount of which should be determined by the leaders overseeing this case. And that's really hard because there's not even broad strokes. Whereas, in the PRT.
And that's very limited to just counseling. Like there's a lot of impacts that people don't realize.
Yeah. And it says, and it says, it does not say including but not limited to. It just says including, which tells me that they are going to limit it. And again, this is actually under criminal behavior. So you can human traffic and then pay for some
counseling,
shitty counseling,
and then wait 2 years.
Yeah, and then wait 2 years, and you're good. And and part of the reason that this is important. Okay, let's say
we were the Church of Law and Order, Susan.
I tell you, we're the Church of Legal Loopholes. But part of the reason this is so important is someone can be determined to have violated a criminal statute and then be found outside of the statute of limitations, so they can't be prosecuted criminally.
Technical.
So any resemblance to actual public figures is purely intentional. And so that's why this is so important, because under this document, they could determine that even though there's a pattern of predatory behavior, after 2 years, Mike Bickle actually can be reinstated because God performed the miracle of repentance in his heart. And that is not safe for them. That is not emotionally safe for any victim. That's not emotionally safe for me. That is doing the exact opposite of what this sets out to do. It says right here. Watch me thinking that I had it.
And then you don't.
No, I think it's like literally the last statement in the document. this this summary is not for civil law yeah, it's really not.
Mhm.
And it this standard is far below civil law standards. And it is, yeah, it is.
Should we do the last one here?
Yeah, I wanted to find the one I wanted to find is that it should not be a haven for predators. The church should not be a haven.
Oh, it's right below here. It says something similar after this last point here.
Yeah,
The
okay,
so the
perfect.
last one is the right to grieve and heal without pressure. Victims have the right to move through the healing process at their own pace without being pressured to forgive and move on too quickly. Forgiveness cannot be coerced, and healing must be respected as a journey. And where I think we would have problems with that is going to be like perceived outcomes by these people for these people. Um,
I think I mean, my major problem with this is forgiveness cannot be coerced, and then you had 3.5 pages on forgiveness and no pages on what the fruit of repentance looks like.
yes,
There
yeah,
was no tangible, quantitative measure for, "Hey, this is what repentance looks like. You submitted to this long, to this form of counseling. You, um, owned every single item."
which the PRT did that. And the
Mhm.
PRT named things like not full confession, like hiding things, which
Yeah,
is what Mike Bickle
yeah,
assumedly has done with saying he didn't do the more serious things when we've heard story after story of him doing the more serious things.
yeah. It's I mean, it's and then on top of it, it says they're not supposed to be coerced, but it is literally coercing them in this document, and it is not their job to hold victims accountable for forgiveness. That belongs to God, because some of these people, God has not forgiven.
Well, and it comes back to the biblical manipulation. They list out all the verses of forgiveness, of just mercy over just judgment, and all that kind of stuff in this document. And it's the same kind of manipulation that they're condemning in this document, which is
It
why this document's such a
this document is spiritual abuse. That is what this document is. I'm saying that for me, I'm not gonna speak for Brantley, but this document is a spiritually abusive document because it says that it is one thing, but it is actually subjecting victims to a process that is re-traumatizing, and it is using biblical justification to do it. That is a misuse of biblical authority, of spiritual authority.
it
They're
take
using their position as apostles
yeah,
to enact something that actually protects their power at the expense of victims. That is spiritual abuse. This document is spiritually abusive.
because we all know they love being apostles and not pastors.
Mhm.
That's how it is.
Yeah.
Do you want to read this last part and then we'll wrap up? Is that what?
Yeah, yeah. And what
The church must be a refuge for the wounded, not a shelter for the unrepentant. When spiritual leaders violate their sacred trust, triggered
Mm.
through abuse, their actions not only harm individuals, but also discredit the witness of the gospel. Silence, complicity, and cover up have no place in the body of Christ.
This document does everything it commits to not doing, and it is horrifying.
Because this like statement here, like I think me and you both get behind this statement 100%. Like
Yeah.
it's a great statement, but everything else around it's not.
Well, and right here, we commit ourselves to a higher standard, the one that reflects the righteousness and compassion that Jesus commanded and demonstrated. We recognize that healing cannot take place without truth, that reconciliation cannot occur without, they should not be attempting reconciliation, period, without accountability, and that grace is never a substitute for justice. These rights are not merely ideals, they are. In this document, they are merely ideals. They are essential elements to the restoration of integrity to the body and the renewal and hope for every survivor. But this document fails to do this on every single point. They are not holding themselves to a higher standard, because the higher standard is the standard of the world, which is disgusting. The higher standard is for any other helping profession, and that is what a pastoral position, a ministry position, any position in the church where you are leading, you are a shepherd. That is a caretaking profession. And the standard of the world for caretaking uh, um, professions is that if you violate the body, or even the emotionally violate, there's as a therapist, if you abuse your position of power, you are removed from it
A doctor.
forever. If you are a doctor, if you are a lawyer, if you are a teacher, if you have sex with a student or with someone in your care, you are removed from that position permanently. So there is not a higher standard.
And
That is
what do those people
right
do
by.
when their calling is stripped from them, Susan? What do? They go find a different kind of job, right?
They do.
That's amazing.
They do. And I think that's a really good thing for people to do. What I'd like to see in this, if this was a serious document, we would see a plan for how to help pastors find new jobs.
Right. Right.
If they were serious about holding pastors accountable, they would solve that problem.
Or even before we even get to that, just a route of education on these things. Like, you want to do something meaningful, iCal, like your next little gathering of apostles that you do, bring in Diane Langberg and let her talk to your people
Yeah.
and tell them how to do these things.
Yeah.
It's not hard.
Yeah. 'Cause I don't see the name of a single credible expert on abuse, a single advocate. I see the names of lawyers.
There was two lawyers.
Lawyers, and 2 lawyers who are experts in institutional matters and not victim rights. And so,
That know how to protect the money.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I know that's not what a economist is, but whew, we went over time, but hey, it was what it was. We may end up talking about this more. We may not. We may end up doing further stuff with it. Who knows? But this has been fun. I'm glad we were able to do this. Do you have any last words?
No, run from any church that that validates this document.
Yes. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time we see you. And you can follow the Open Spaces page to see whenever we go live. Join our Open Spaces group we got a little support group there, people who have survived Charismania.
Peer support group.
What's that? A peer support group.
Peers supporting peers.
Peer support group. And we'll catch you guys next time.